Hello everyone, Yukiro again. What seems to be a recurring problem is my Let's View for my phone really does not want to work. Maybe at all. It seems to work like once a month for some reason. So if anyone knows a better screen share app that I can use to share my mobile phone so I can use Reality, that would be greatly appreciated. And today we're going to talk about the humans in Dragon Age. I might break down the various different races, but I thought I'll start with the humans. Because although they may seem the most simple, they're actually full of a rich history and culture and lore. And BioWare did a really good job with them, and I do really like the different cultures in Dragon Age, even just, going through the humans. Okay, so let's talk about the history of how humans not came to be, but it'll go back before the humans were even known to exist. So, the history is that both the elves and dwarves claims that there was a time where humans did not, walk the land. So humans were first seen in the rainforests of Parvolan, and that was thousands of years ago. And obviously they spread across all of Thedas in their time. So there's no mention of humans before the Veil. For those who've not played Dragon Age, the Veil is a magical barrier between... It's a lot more complicated than what I'm going to say, but in simple terms, there's the waking world and the dream world. The dream world is where, obviously, people go to dream, but it's also the realm where magi tap in, and that's where they go to harness their powers, and that's where they meet demons and spirits and things. It's called the Fade, but the Veil is like a curtain between those two worlds. Nobody can see it or touch it, but those who harness magic can they know it's there. Okay, so there are different types of cultures, as I've said. So before we get into all the different ones that are in existence today, the biggest human settlement way back when was Tevinter. And before the Chantry, before any of I'm going to say modern day Dragon Age, but you know what I mean. So before the modern age religion came to be, these humans used to worship a pantheon of old gods, which were dragons. The dragons are now said to be asleep under the earth, which is where the Maker banished them. But again, that doesn't happen yet in the history of humans, so... No, I suppose it does. But humans don't know that yet. It's a long, complicated thing. So anyway, the rulers of Tevinter were magisters, and they would talk to the old gods, and they would learn magic from them, and learn the history of the world, and where all the different secrets. This is also where they learn blood magic. So the old gods helped engage in the defeat of the elven kingdoms, and pretty much that's how the elves became enslaved by the humans. So obviously Tevinter then had a lot of elves and probably other races as their slaves, and with those they obviously built the pyramid bigger, stronger. I'm going to say the greatest in their opinion. Those in power are the ones who are correct. So Tevinter pretty much conquered almost all of Thedas in a couple of centuries. It's not clear how long they were in charge. it's just given a vague, few centuries. Eventually, the Imperium was challenged by some barbarians from the south, and this is where the law of the Maker's Bride comes into play. So the armies were led by, I'm probably going to butcher these names because of my dyslexia, so bear with me, Matharoth and the prophet Andraste. So Andraste brought the teachings of the new god, the Maker, and those who were enslaved by the Tevinter, those who were poor and were looking for a leader, they all pretty much turned to her and started considering her the prophet. And as their armies grew and grew, they became quite the challenge for Tevinter. And eventually this turned into the Exalted March, until she was betrayed by her her husband, who was jealous of the power that she had gained from this worship of her and her god. So he turned Andraste over to Tevinter, and unfortunately she was burned at the stake. Despite this, obviously, Tevinter did get knocked back a peg or two, and so that's when the Chant of Light was began to be sung, from all corners of the world. So that's how the chantry began to spread. So the collects of the chantry, pretty much all female, apart from in Tevinter, where they are run by a man. That's probably one of the biggest differences between the Tevinter chantry and the chantry from, say, Ferelden and Orlais and other places. Because that's just how Tevinter has always been run. It's been run by men. Religiously, with all the old gods and that. So their chantry is different from the other chantry in other ways, but maybe I'll talk about that subject at a different time. Okay, so there are several different human nations in Thedas. You have the Andvels, you have Antiva, you have Ferelden, which is where most of the games take place. The Free Marches, which is where number 2 takes place. In the Free Marches you have Kirkwall, Starkhaven, Tantervale and Ostwick. Hopefully I didn't butcher those last 2 names. And then you have Navara, Orlais, Rivian, hopefully I didn't butcher that one, and obviously the Tevinter. So another interesting fact about humans is they can mix with the other races. With elves, their offspring's elf-blooded, so you don't exactly have half elves, half whatever. It's just elf-blooded. They are, for all intents and purposes, elves, but with weaker bloodlines. It's very, very rare that humans and dwarfs can produce offspring, simply because dwarfs, their fertility rates are already low, even between their own kind, and producing any offspring with a human, it's not impossible, but it is very unlikely. And again, their children, if they do manage to have them, are probably almost... They are taller than normal dwarfs, like full-blooded dwarfs, but they are shorter than humans. You're probably not going to find human and dwarf parents in, say, Orzammar, where they live underground. So, humans and dwarfs, if you have that sort of parent, it's only going to be on the surface. So the one thing which is different from most fantasy things is all the races, that they have the same sort of natural life cycle. None live longer than the other. There is lore behind why that is, at least for the elves. I can't remember about the dwarfs. I'll have to look into it again to be sure, but I know for the elves there is a reason why their lifespan is as short as humans. Maybe I'll go into that, lore and everything when I discuss the elves a bit more. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the different human settlements. I'll start with the Underfells. I can't remember too much about the Underfells, so you have to bear with me. I do remember that it is where probably going to butcher this name as well. Weisthaupt Fortress is, and that's where the birthplace of the Grey Wardens is. It is technically part of the Tevinter Imperium, though they did break away from Tevinter for a little while. I believe Tevinter regained control over the area. I'm not sure how much control they have over the place. 2 blights have happened there, including the first one. I can't remember when the other one was. But the first blight, I believe, lasted for about 100 years. It did leave most of the area that the blight took place in pretty much devoid of life, so not even bugs will go there. So if someone dies, their body, you won't get flies or anything on the body because there just is nothing there. No grass, no bugs, nothing at all. And I want to say the second time that area got hit by a blight, it was the 3rd blight, and that ended in the Free Marshes. We haven't visited the place in the games yet, but we have heard about Weisthaupt Fortress quite a bit because it is the birthplace of the Grey Wardens and the first blight and all that lot. The next settlement I'm going to talk about is Antiva. I want to say Isabella is from Antiva. No, it's not Isabella. I think it was Zevran. Actually, yeah, I think it's Zevran, not Isabella. I think Isabella is from Ravine. I get my places mixed up. So Antiva, I want to say it was mostly... I want to say the accent there, because Severin has the accent. I want to say Spanish? I'm going to have to look that up. Okay, so Antiva is actually Italian. Well, it's not Italian, but that's the accent that they use there, so I'm going to assume that the culture is going to be very similar to Italy. So, from what I remember, it is a coastline city. Antiva city is the the capital. Okay, so Antiva is where the 4th blight broke out, and the Darkspawn did concentrate in Antiva. I don't believe the Darkspawn ever actually made it to the capital, although I could be mistaken and I can't quite remember the finer details. I don't believe there was any other blights there. I vaguely remember a queen getting assassinated. And I do remember the crows took credit for it. The crows are sort of like an assassin band. So that's the job Severin has. When you first meet him, he's an assassin. One other interesting fact I remember is that Antiva was the place where dragons first reappeared, and then obviously from there they sort of spread into the rest of Corlay and Navarra. think there was much information more than that given in the games. So Antiva is really well known for its intrigue and obviously assassinations. And there's lots of power struggles between royalty and nobles and things like that. Okay, that's all I can remember from Antiva. Okay, so I'll talk about the Free Marshes next. So from what I remember of the Free Marshes is there's lots of different smaller sort of settlements there. So you've got Kirkwall and Starkhaven being the main two, I want to say. We haven't been to any of the others. We've only been to Kirkwall in the second game. They're all pretty much independent from each other. So there's no one sort of king for all of the Free Marshes. Each city is run by their own sort of ruler. Okay, so just like Antiva, the Free Marshes were also part of the Fourth Blight. So Kirkwall is run by a Viscount. I think Starkhaven is run by a king. Kirkwall obviously is where the second game takes place, or majority of it. You do see a little bit of the countryside, but for the most part you are kind of stuck in Kirkwall. So the marshes were part of Tevinter Imperium. I don't believe they are anymore. As I said, they're pretty much rule themselves now. So a little bit of trivia. So I don't know if Starkhaven all has the same accents. However, Prince Sebastian Vale does have a Scottish accent, so one might guess that where he lives, Starkhaven, has a strong Scottish accent influence there. Kirkwall, I don't believe has anyone else in there that has the Scottish accent. I believe a lot of it is probably American accents. There are different races there, though. So you have obviously the elves that live in the alienage. You obviously have the dwarfs who live surfside, and obviously the humans. You also have Qunari in the countryside, who like to go to war with Tevinter. The Free Marshes are pretty much on Tevinter's doorstep, so sometimes they see Qunari troubles as well. I won't go through all of Dragon Age 2 yet, because spoilers, but one of the last act's main sort of thing you have to deal with is the Qunari. There are Qunari that aren't part of the Qun, but that's a whole other topic, so that's it for the Free Marshes. Navarra is... I don't remember a whole lot of Navarra. We haven't visited there as far as I can remember. I know it sort of borders Orlais. So unlike other Andrastians, as I said, they don't really bury their dead in the ground. They sort of bury them in tombs and catacombs. These sort of tombs do have sort of gardens, bathhouses, ballrooms, but they're only used for the dead. But essentially, they have a very strong sort of passion for their dead. Kind of think of it like Egypt in how they treat their dead. They bury a person with their valuable items, things like that. Okay, so in the sense of bringing their dead back to life, I obviously don't mean back to life. So they believe that when a dead soul crosses the Fade, it displaces a spirit that comes from the Fade. So in order to provide safe hosts, they allow them to sort of possess their dead. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. That's essentially what happens. So another thing about Navarra is that it is well renowned for the its artwork and, you know, architecture and things like that. It has a lot of sort of like cultural events. So in the autumn, Novara City hold ancestral pageants where lanterns are lit to illuminate the streets and the statues of the ancestors and families. They drape the statues in like colourful cloth and hire actors to like play out the events from those people's lives. So in the winter they have like skating and other general winter festivities. I can't really remember too much about that. I know there's one in spring as well. I think in spring it is sort of like a test of arms, like archery, sword fighting, and they probably jousting. Although I think they lessened the jousting in like modern days. That's all I can remember for Novara. We haven't been there yet, so maybe one day, you know, we'll get to explore it. I don't believe any of the blights took place there. Maybe like the fourth blight sort of like passed through. But I don't think any of the blights focused on that sort of area. So the next area I'll talk about will be Orlais. So Orlais is primarily sort of like French influenced, with their sort of like their accent, and a lot of their sort of like political intrigue. We do get to go into Orlais during Inquisition, the third game. In fact, I think we go into the Imperial Palace as well. In Valroy, I want to say the place was. I've probably butchered that. So Valroy is where the seat of the Divine is. So the Divine is obviously Andraste's sort of like holy person. So Orlais did sort of like end up joining Tevinter to help fight back the first blight. Obviously this sort of like truce didn't last all that long, but I think after 100 years you'd kind of get a little bit desperate, so Orlais is one of the most powerful of the human nations. There are elves there, but a lot of them are servants, or they're definitely not seen as equals at all. They're not slaves there, but they're not too far from it. A lot of the elves do, you know, kind of resent like the nobles and things. Okay, so the Orlais is sort of the border skirmishes between the Dales, which is where the elves sort of live or originated from. If I recall correctly, some of these sort of like the old sort of like important buildings were originally elvish, but obviously were taken over by the humans. I can't quite remember off the top of my head which ones, but I'm fairly sure some, or probably all of them were. At one point there was an uprising of the elves, and they had captured, I'm probably going to butcher this name now, Montserrat. And they did march on Valroy at one point. Obviously, the Divine at the time called for an exalted march against the elves, so unfortunately the elves were pretty much sacked and killed. After that, the same person, the same Divine, did say, you know, that any elves that converted to the worship of the Maker would be welcome into the human cities. And that's how the sort of like the alienages and, you know, the poor slums sort of came to be. in the human cities. The third blight did attack Orlais and Montserrat. They did also eventually send aid to the Free Marshes, only after being really pressured by the Grave Wardens to help. Orlais isn't really looked too fondly on by the Ferelden's. Ferelden's pretty much see them as conquerors. Probably not much different than, they'll see Tevinter in the old days. But obviously, in their opinion, Tevinter's probably worse because they used all the evil magic. Whereas Orlais doesn't, quote unquote, use evil magic. It doesn't matter where you're from. Blood magic is going to be there at some point. You're going to have at least one or two, or probably several, who, use dark magic. So the winter is run by the Magi, so they're more open about using it than, say, Orlais is. Orlais probably wouldn't turn down certain magic as long as nobody knew it was them. As I said, there's a lot of political intrigue behind the scenes, so as long as they don't get caught, then nobody knows. So as I mentioned, there are conflicts with Ferelden. So the Mad Emperor sort of ordered an invasion of Ferelden. But a lot of support from the bands decided, we're not putting up with that, and they pushed back. King Marek was one of the people who pushed Orlais back out, alongside Logain. Obviously, that was when Marek was alive. If you read the books, there is a story with Marek before he became the King of Ferelden, and obviously Logain, and their meeting, and that sort of struggle. Okay, so the fashion of Orlais is very sort of very French inspired. You have those big puffy neck things. I can't remember what they're called, but it's very flamboyant and very in your face sort of stuff. They're very vibrant as well. They do wear makeup for both men and the women. They also like to wear masks a lot. Each each family will have their own sort of crest and their own sort of mask associated with that family. So if a servant has their mask, it'll be in some way related to the family's mask. Say a lion, for example. They won't be as extravagant as say the lord or the lady of that family, but they'll have a lion theme to it. It's all part of sort of the game and their little culture. There's a lot more to Orlais, but I could really be here all day. The last thing I say is the relationship between Ferelden and Orlais is still very much, it's very complicated. They're trying to sort of mend the bridges, but there's still a lot of distrust and going on. Okay, so we'll talk about Rivia next, and this is where Isabella comes from. So I want to say it's definitely more Caribbean inspired, maybe Spanish. So Isabella is very piratey, and I'm not thinking Jack Sparrow sort of pirate. Although at one point she does sort of steal a boat of slaves and freeze them, so maybe a little bit like Jack Sparrow. We haven't visited this area, and what we do know is only from Isabella. Rivienne is one of the only places where they have a peaceful settlement of Kunari. They also have a peaceful relationship with elves there. Their religion isn't Andrastian, so they don't believe in the Maker. They believe more in the natural orders of things, like their God and their universe are the same thing. I believe Rivian's royalty is still Andrastian, but there's no sort of like authority there. A lot of people do join the Qun there. I believe Duncan is also from Rivian, actually, thinking about it. Okay, so if we talk about Tevinter for a bit, and then I'll do Ferelden last, and then I'll wrap this up. So, as I've mentioned quite a few times, Tevinter is, or was, one of the strongest human settlements in all of Thedas. Is one of the oldest settlements. Okay, so the Tevinter is ruled by the Magisterium instead of the Chantry, although there is a Chantry there, but the Divine there is, the top person in the Magisterium, so it's kind of one and the same. So unlike the rest of the world, where mages do not have a position of power, in Tevinter it's the opposite. The mages are the position of power. They do have trade networks with the dwarfs, and in the past, it was the Imperium that invaded Arlathan and sacked the Elvenern, the elves. It was obviously the Imperium who were empowered by the enslavement of elvenkind, and it is in Tevinter where the first blight was sort of came into existence. So a group of magisters decided that they were going to listen to one of their old gods, Dumat, and he sort of encouraged them to go into the city of the Maker, or so the law goes. And it was them, going into the Fade and pushing their way into this seat of the Maker, or the city, where they were corrupted and then thrown back to Thedas, and they were the first Darkspawn, and they searched for their old god, and in finding him, corrupted him, and then that's how the first blight began, or so the legends go. And I have discussed a lot more about Andraste and how she rose up against them, so I won't go back into that. Nowadays, although blood magic is frowned upon in Tevinter, you're probably going to find that almost all of those in power use blood magic, although they'll deny it and, disavow it. But if you want more power to, keep your head, so to speak, you kind of need the extra power because everyone else is using it. It's a vicious cycle, basically. So, as I've mentioned before, Tevinter, is at war with the Kunari. I do believe they are still at war with the Kunari. We don't know a whole lot about it, apart from little tidbits that we get from Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age 3, where we do sort of meet a few people that mention it. There are definitely a lot of cults in Tevinter, where some of the magi still believe in the old gods, still kind of worship them. I don't think it's that prevalent, but again, they're not going to admit to these things. Okay, so with Tevinter, it's a lot more nuanced than I've been saying up until this point, mostly because it's very complicated. So I'll try and simplify it as much as I can. So there are sort of like 3 parts to Tevinter. So you have obviously the Magi, you have the elven slaves, but that's not all Tevinter is. So you have obviously the Magisterium and those in power. So that's their little group. You have the sleepers. I'm probably going to butcher the name. They are called the Soporati. Sorry if I butcher that. These are non-magical citizens. So they don't have magic. They'll never have magic. And they'll never be in a position of power. So they're pretty much the commoners. The best they can hope for is that their children will have the magical talent. And it's sort of like a lure. And saying like, anyone could rise in power, even a slave, if they have magic. Whether or not, that actually happens is a whole other matter. A lot of, apprentice magi probably aren't going to get that big a position of power. And then obviously you have the slaves. So in Tevinter, a lot of outsiders will see it as forced servitude. And that is true in a lot of cases. In the case of Fenris from Dragon Age 2, obviously he escapes, which is great. But before he escapes, and before he becomes a slave, he actually willingly goes into a deal with the Magister that he becomes a slave to, in order to help his family. So his family gets money and help. I can't remember everything, but basically he makes a bargain with the Magister. I'll be your servant if you can give my family a good life. Unfortunately his Magister is a complete arsehole, and so he deserves everything he gets to him when he spoilers. Yeah, I don't like the whole slavery thing. It's interesting from a story point of view, but that guy was a douche and he deserved it. He deserved a hand through the chest. Anyway, my Fenris is a baby boy. He does not deserve slavery, even if he chose to be in it. He's a good boy. He's a very good boy. The other sort of classes, I'm going to say, other than Saporati, is the Latans. Again, sorry if I've butchered that. They are the next level above. And they are the mages who were born into families that, up until that point, had no magic. They usually become sort of like the apprentices, or sometimes they'll be used as sacrifices for the greater good. Sometimes they do rise in power themselves. It's just not likely unless they are really, really strong with their magic talents, but Tevinter. And then you have the Altus, and these are the mages who are descended from the Dreamers or Magisters, and they were the people who the ability to speak to the old gods and the Fate. Again, the old gods are not objects of the worship anymore, but these magi are still, held in high esteem by the others. There is also the Liberati, and if I recall correctly, they are ex-slaves. So they are slaves and they have been legally freed from their position before a judge. So maybe the owner has died, or maybe they have agreed to, free the slave for good deeds or whatever. and that's how they become liberati. They're still not really considered citizens. But they are sort of like a subclass, and they're not slaves anymore. So they're kind of like below the commoners, but not really commoners. Tevinter. That's all you have to know. I want to say Tevinter is very much like pretty much any culture that, used slaves. So like Europe heavily inspires it, I think. I personally really like to think that it's more like Rome, like the old Rome, where, everything was just accepted there. And, well, not everything, but majority of things were just accepted there. But I don't have any, solid proof that that's what BioWare was going for. For all I know, it could be based on a whole other culture. But personally, I would say it reminds me a lot of Rome, where they have their slaves would be there, or be not just workers, but they would be like bodyguards, fighters. They would go in and fight in matches and really do proud for their owners and that was my view anyway. As I said, I could be wrong on that. So obviously, because of the whole slavery thing, the rest of Ferelden doesn't really like Tevinter all that much. Plus the whole Magi thing, they really don't like that. Obviously, the elves outside of Tevinter hate the Tevinters. Obvious reasons, and I don't blame them one little bit. I would also hate them too. But that's me looking at it from a Welsh version, not liking what the English did to my people long ago. So the dwarves and Tevinters do get along, and I believe there's a lot of trade going on between them. I don't think there's any arguments that I remember off the top of my head. And obviously the Qunari, which I've mentioned before. So a couple of Tevinters that we do meet is Denarius. Yeah, he can go jump off a bridge. And then of course you've got Dorian from Dragon Age Inquisition. And Dorian is, well, he's so cute. He's very cute. He's a good boy. He's definitely critical of his countrymen. He obviously doesn't understand what's wrong with slavery, but you can sort of convince him that it's wrong. Especially if you played an elf. And he does want to make his country better. And obviously he's not a huge fan of all the blood mage and things like that. Okay, so the last place would be Ferelden, which is where Dragon Age Origins, is based around. So Ferelden is more, I'm going to say, is definitely more inspired by British cultures. Mostly I'm going to say the English, simply because, the elves are Welsh and Irish and whatnot. But the humans are definitely sort of like the English. So you obviously got your kings, your queens, your nobles. And it is run by that, all of Ferelden is run by this one royal family. As I've said, they've been at war with both Tevinter and Orlais. A little bit of interesting information is Ferelden is one of the few places which had a Grey Warden rebellion. And for a while, the Grey Wardens were sort of I'm going to say banished, for lack of a better word, from Ferelden. King Merrick did reinstate the Grey Wardens, because he knew like a blight would be coming eventually. Unfortunately, he doesn't live to sort of like see it, but it's thanks to him that there are Grey Wardens at the start of Origins. So obviously the 5th blight is what happens in Origins, and that happens around Ferelden. I won't go into detail because spoilers, and I will be playing through it. So after the blight is ended, you do still have other Darkspawn issues to deal with in the DLC Dragon Age Origins Awakening. Again, I won't spoil anything because I will eventually play it. In Ferelden, although they do still look down on elves in the sense that they do live in the alien ages, unlike the rest of Thedas, elves do actually have rights. And, they get paid for their work. So, they're never slaves. They can become servants if they want, but again, they are paid for their services. They can have jobs, they have houses, even though they're in the slums. They're free, is what I'm basically trying to say. Those who don't sort of like find work and can't, find high-paying jobs, they still feel that they have better lives in Ferelden than if they lived anywhere else, because at least they are free, and they do have family who look out for each other, which isn't always true in the other countries, especially like Tevinter. So although they still don't like the human nobles, especially when they sort of like barge in and throw their weight around, they don't hate them as much as if, elves elsewhere hate humans. The one thing that separates Ferelden humans from others is their importance of dogs. So Fereldans have a very strong connection with Mabari warhound dogs, and all the nobles will use these sort of like warhound dogs. And Mabari is quite smart, and they'll only listen to their owner. They are fierce, so they're not, a dog that you have in your lap. If you have watched my playthrough, you'll have already met Sir Borks, which is what I've named my Mabari. And you'll probably see he is quite big and ferocious. But he's still a good boy. He's very much a good boy. So there is myths and legends around like the Mabari, and they can sort of like detect a werewolf even in human disguise, is one of those myths and legends. And I can't think of anything else for Fereldans that I haven't already discussed, or wouldn't be, huge major spoilers for the game, so I'll end it there. For next I'll try and refresh my memory on the dwarves and go over more about them, because there are more dwarves outside of Orzammar, but I haven't spoken about them because obviously spoilers. Or maybe I'll talk about the elves more, because I have a weakness for elves, at least in this universe, so maybe I'll speak about elves next. We'll see. But anyway, thank you so much for coming to my video. I greatly appreciate it. If you could like and subscribe, if you'd like to see more, that would be, again, greatly appreciated. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.